Why, I'm glad you asked. It's Things I Learned from Mario's Butt by Laura Kate Dale, who is on the official Jimquisition podcast. Podquisition. It's not good wordplay. Look, it's Bloodborne, but an arse. And what's this? Why, I have written a bit of it. Oh, Metaton, arse. Mega Man, arse. I'm biased, of course, but I genuinely, this is good. Laura's cool. Butthole. Things from the butt. Available on a date. I should have checked before I did the video. Also, look at this fucking prick. He's called Mr. Crad. When making a living covering anti-customer business practices in the game industry, one often finds that the most virulent, if not violent, pushback comes from the customers themselves. Game executives, for the most part, are content to sit back and let the rabble argue amongst itself, safe in the knowledge that the literal millions of dollars they wield like pocket change will remain warm and snug in its cozy offshore nest. Meanwhile, armies of sycophants from gaming communities and the gaming media will line up to do the fighting for them, convinced that criticising the industry's unethical and abusive practices is worse than the practices themselves. They behave as if the thing they should take up arms and fight against isn't predatory and manipulative economies, physically and mentally dangerous overtime and outright sex abuse, but the people who suggest those things should stop. And that is why things don't stop. Because there are millions of unpaid soldiers on capitalism's increasingly fatal death march, eager to die on the hill of a billionaire getting thousands of more dollars every single minute he stands there scratching his dick. Why? Why are these openly aggressive and abusive corporations so good at convincing legions of followers to ignore all the unveiled contempt and go to bat for the fuckers? Well, the answer is simple. They got the goods, baby. It's one of the simpler scenarios in the world's great complexity. People want products, publishers have products, and there are many people who, for one reason or another, will trade in their very dignity for the opportunity to buy something. Years of harassment and being unpersoned by large sections of the gaming world have given me enough insight to realise that you don't need a lot of insight here. You just need to watch how fucking furious people get when you talk about the harmful ingredients that went into an overhyped video game release. A queue of snotty gamers trademarks shouting at you for spoiling people's fun or making everything too negative or not moving on. You only have to see how folks cry over review scores for these games if they're below a 9 out of 10 because for some reason, they can't truly enjoy games if literally a single person doesn't completely agree with them. Most people have forgotten about the abusive conditions mentioned at Epic Games, at NetherRealm, at Ubisoft of course, at CD Projekt Red. Oh, but you ask any of these fuckers about that time a reviewer didn't like Grand Theft Auto 5 as much as they did. Jesus Christ. They'll hold on to that shit for years. You only have to watch just any moment whatsoever where the capital G gamers aren't coddled and catered to, and you can see them fly off the handle. And it's all about comfort. It's all about wanting to enjoy your games in an echo chamber where you don't have to think about anything other than feeling powerful. This is exactly how game publishers like it, of course. Oh yeah, they'll give you your power fantasies. So long as you do acknowledge, of course, that any power you have here is a fantasy. Indeed, you have nothing. What you need to do is sit down, shut up, and sit there docile and grateful while you run around a fictional dystopia that you get to affect change in. A far cry from the actual dystopia you inhabit in real life. This is why the falsehood that games aren't political continues to propagate. Why executives are never asked about their hiring and firing practices or their offshore tax havens in interviews. It's why every time a major video game is out, people care far more about the graphical differences between the PlayStation and Xbox versions than whether or not the people who worked on it were quite literally assaulted by company leadership. People don't want the system to change because the system gives them Assassin's Creed and Cyberpunk and Star Citizen, well, not Star Citizen obviously, but you get the point. Recently, publishers finally took their long-coveted opportunity to raise the prices of so-called AAA games. Most of them aren't even worth 60. We discussed this last episode how the new generation of games is little more than an excuse to raise the basic starter prices for games from $60 to $70, and how games media pundits refuse to do anything but use a single decade-long discredited argument about development costs and inflation to justify it. We didn't touch on it last time, but there is another argument, one that the pundits didn't really think to make, one that was found in comments to my prior video on game prices, one that has been used by devil's advocates since the dawn of currency to stick up for anything a shithead with too much money has done. It's succinct, it's simple, and it's often used as the final word when discussing any anti-customer, CEO-enriching, outright poisonous product. Well, people are going to buy it anyway. And really, what can you say to that? People are going to buy it anyway. Such an all-time classic bit of bootlicking, that. It's a phrase I've seen over and over since I first started going all in on covering the industry's bullshit way back in 2010. A phrase deployed to handwave literally everything a publisher has ever done. Everything I've ever criticised. You'll be able to dig up some people shrugging it all off because corporations will keep raking in the cash, so why even bother? Why tear into microtransactions when people will keep spending money on them? Why belittle an absurdly overpriced collector's edition if it can hoodwink enough suckers? Why even begin to examine the avarice of the mega wealthy when they continue to effortlessly add our money to their well-protected bank accounts? It's a good argument on paper for the aggravatingly effective truth that it's true. There's no getting around that. It's proven that no matter how cruel, manipulative, and outright dangerous a company can be, their products will fly off the shelves regardless. Game prices raised to $70, despite protest, people will pay. Cyberpunk 2077 recently discovered to have had devs crunching for months, not mere weeks like they said, which is exactly what I've been telling people. 4 weeks? You just watch how all toxicity of the studio will be forgotten. Cyberpunk's out. And we wouldn't want to bring anyone down about it. Ubisoft spent years and years and years covering for systematic abuse at its company, including sex abuse. Ubisoft just enjoyed a massive spike in share prices. Share prices some of the very sex abusers and bigots who left Ubisoft get to benefit from since they retained their stock. With all that in mind, it's easy to see why some people want to surrender and just enjoy the games as games. And never mentioning what these companies do when you regurgitate their press releases. But I need you to remember one thing. People will buy it anyway is not a defense. It is a motive. There is a huge fucking difference, and that change in perspective is what's crucial here. We need to see the obscenely massive profit of these companies for what it is, not a validation, but evidence. To put this sentiment in its most recognisable and relatable form, the ends do not justify the means, especially when the means in this case include physical and emotional harm, predation of vulnerable people, and very rich men feeling entitled to more money through dubious ethics and unquestionably fucked morality. For some of these premium games, if the $10 increase was implemented, people would happily pay it, argues NPD analyst Matt Piscatella. They might grumble about it, but they would certainly pay it. The price sensitivity, particularly on day one, suggests that. As with almost all establishment game industry analysis, it's a rudimentary and compartmentalized reduction of the entire situation. It boils it down to its most basic forms. One single action, the price rise, and one single result, the profit. And as I've said over and over and over again, we have to stop this. We have to stop placing every single problem in the game industry in its own little bubble, viewed in concert with absolutely nothing else. To be fair to the analyst, he's an analyst, not a journalist. His job isn't to hold anyone accountable, but to just run the numbers. In fact, unlike any journalists I saw in traditional media, Piscatella is the only person to openly question the argument that game prices have risen because of development costs, something he's right to question because it's a bullshit claim, picked up and regurgitated without a second thought by an endless sea of what we ironically call think pieces. Nonetheless, the sole justification for the price is that people will pay it, a justification that should only be celebrated by the mere saliva of very rich executives to whom almost all of that money will go. None of this explains how any of what the companies are doing is right, none of this explains how any of what the companies are doing should be entirely legal, none of this explains why an entire industry should continue to swindle, shortchange, and cause actual harm to people and get away with it, facing no responsibility, no accountability, accountability, no regulation, just sheer unchecked greed. If you were charged and stood trial for fucking a pumpkin in the middle of Point State Park, you wouldn't be found innocent if all your lawyer did was stand up and say, "Well, they came, Your Honour." Coming isn't an exoneration. In fact, in the case of the Point Park pumpkin pumper of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, all that cum in the pumpkin is evidence. It shows us the reason you did the thing, but not the reason the thing is good. All it demonstrates is that you had a motive when you did wrong. Activision earning $1.2 billion of microtransaction money in just 3 months is cum in a pumpkin. The layoffs, the tax dodging, the gambling mechanics, it's all cum in a pumpkin. The next time you hear a defense of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, stop and ask yourself, is there cum in the pumpkin? Or don't. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but most people don't care. A majority of the people buying these games simply don't know how the sausage is made, thanks to publishers doing a great job of suppressing stories about their misconduct, an act establishment media is more than happy to help perpetrate. Of those who do know, however, the grim reality is that most actively don't give a fuck, or worse, are so predominantly concerned with their own entertainment that they'll perform Matrix shit in their heads to find a reason why it's okay to buy the game just this once. In fact, if you're one of those people who have ever said, "I will stop buying this company's games after the next one," I'd be interested to see how many of you actually stopped. But that's the real truth of the "people will buy it anyway" argument. More often than not, what they're really saying is, "I will buy it anyway." They don't want to take that kind of responsibility though, so they remind others and themselves that they're not alone. Speaking once again to that desire for comfort, it's a lot more snug to couch a statement in plurality. It's not just you, it's people. It's everyone. It's millions of games being sold, so your one sale won't matter anyway. People will buy it. You should get to buy it too. And if you want to buy a game and play a game, go right ahead. I'm not here to shame anyone for that. I've said so before. I don't consider guilting people an effective use of my time. If you're one of the really vocal ones, the ones who are violently opposed to feeling bad about anything you do or support, I'm pretty sure I'd be wasting the effort to try and find an ounce of shame in you. Depending on the product you're supporting, I might not want to be friends with you. Like anyone who can forgive a TERF like J.K. Rowling, who's aiding a movement designed to kill me and my actual friends just because she wrote Harry fucking Potter. Yeah, I can't wait for the reviews of that fucking Hogwarts game. But if my show ever makes you feel guilty about the amount of money you hand over to game publishers, maybe it's not actually me making you feel that way. Maybe it's you. And maybe that deserves reflection, because you wouldn't be feeling guilty about video games like this if you weren't already prepared to feel it. If you think it's just video games and anyone complaining about the industry behind those games is being too negative, if you think the stuff these companies have done should just be forgotten and moved on from, why would you ever feel bad about what I have to say? I'd start exploring the whys and hows of that rather than shooting the messenger. In fact, start feeling bad about that, you fucking rifle. Over the course of this year, we here at the Jimquisition, well, me and Justin, have been talking about, like, how do you cover certain games if you don't want to support them? You know, we've shown this in episodes over time, over the past few months especially. I've already said I won't be touching Ubisoft games because fuck them. As far as I'm concerned, until they satisfactorily address it, they will only be known to me as the company that spent years protecting and coddling abusers. It should come as no surprise that I'm not touching the fucking Hogwarts one. And on that same note, I think I'm not going to do Cyberpunk 2077 as well. I mean, just between the crunch and the constant flirtations with transphobia, I was looking forward to it. No. Instead, I will just play more Call of Duty Cold War. Principles aren't fun. Thank God for me.